Hey, I'm Cameron Coward, and yes, that is my real last name. Today I am going to be reviewing this WeCreat Vision laser cutter. It's a 20-watt diode laser cutter designed for hobbyists and prosumers. WeCreat is a new company, and this is their first model to be released. It's meant to compete with Creality and the lower end of the X-Tool market, that sort of thing. One of the standout features is that it has a full enclosure, unlike some other laser cutters on the hobbyist market like the Falcon 2, which are open frame laser cutters. This is a big deal for safety. There's no chance of laser beam reflecting off of anything like material, reflecting off of that and hitting you in the eyes or hitting something and catching it on fire or anything like that. It's also good for dust collection and for keeping smell down if you're doing any laser cutting indoors like I am here in my condo. Arguably its most unique feature is the Z-axis system. Now most laser cutters like this will have an internal Z-axis structure that raises and lowers the head or the material. But this is a little bit different. This gray area is a shroud, so the entire thing moves up and down. So when you lower the Z-axis, the entire top of the machine, which is a lid, will lower up and down, and this gray area will get smaller and wider. So this is basically your entire working area for the Z-axis. It's interesting because you don't see that very often, but the real advantage of that is that if you're going to transport this, the machine actually gets smaller when the Z-axis is already all the way down. So that's an interesting idea. It certainly helps keep shipping costs down when WeCreat ships the machine to you. But for like a day-to-day thing, it doesn't really provide much advantage to most people. I suppose it does if you needed to store it somewhere when it wasn't in use, then it does get smaller and that does help. But otherwise, it's just kind of a unique and interesting idea. My favorite feature is the camera system. If you open up the lid, you can see that there is a little camera right there. These are lights that turn on to illuminate the interior when it's turned on, when the machine is on. And this camera looks down at the workpiece, and it's really useful for positioning your cuts. So you can see, if we look at this, and I'll show you the parts I cut out in the future, but you'll see I was able to get these like really close together and without having to do any special measurements or trying to figure out where my origin was or doing like the laser projection to find out where that was. I could just squeeze all these different jobs in next to each other because the laser system can see the material, see what you've already cut, and will lay out a little simulated view of where it's going to cut the next part, which is really nice because I get frustrated when I'm trying to deal with positioning origins. It's a pain in the butt, so this makes that a lot easier. But having said that, it isn't perfect. It won't give you precision. So where the spot where it tells you the cut's going to be is generally a millimeter or two off, so don't expect to be able to like overlap lines or things like that. It's more just to be able to do things like this, test late parts, that sort of thing, and be able to squeeze as much out of a sheet of material as you can. It's not really for precise precision. It's not really for precise positioning, but it's still super useful and definitely my favorite feature of this machine. The WeCreat Vision also has a rotary axis that is available. This attaches down here on the inside of the machine and has these chucks so you can attach cylindrical objects like this cup. Those, you could attach it there and cut your cylindrical objects. This doesn't come with the base machine. It's an upgrade, but it's pretty nice. Definitely worthwhile if you plan on cutting anything cylindrical. Attaching it is easy. There's only 2 mounting holes, so you just have 2 screws, screw that in, and then plug this cable in, and then you're good to go. The only downside is that this chuck isn't the best. The actual, I don't know, whatever these are called on the chucks, the gripping pads are some sort of plastic, and then there's a fair amount of play in the chuck. So this isn't like something you'd find on like a lathe or something like that. It's nowhere close to that quality, but it's good enough to hold your parts in place while you're laser cutting them. Because it's a laser cutter, it's not putting any force, lateral force, on your part. So as long as it can support the weight, then that's all you need. And if you have a heavy part, this little doodad is a support that goes down there, and you can raise and lower these wheels so that you can support heavier objects. So it shouldn't be an issue, but just don't expect that chuck to be super high quality or anything. This machine also has an air assist unit, which is right here. It's an external unit, but it plugs into power from the machine, so you don't have to plug in a separate power cable or anything. It plugs directly into the machine, the air hose into the machine, and it just sits here, and it has vibration pads to keep it from shaking your desk. It works pretty well. It's a little bit noisier than would be ideal, but it's not too bad. And the big advantage there is that it's blowing air through where the laser beam comes out, and that helps to blow away debris that you've cut and to blow away smoke away from the part, so you keep getting a clean cut. So those are pretty much not quite a necessity, but almost. So it's good that it comes with one. Now, if you buy a WeCreat Vision, you'll have two options for software. You can use Lightburn software, which is super popular with really the entire industry, at least in the hobbyist and prosumer levels. Lightburn is really good software. Or you can use WeCreat's own Make It software. If you want all the features, especially like that camera system, then you want to use Make It. You won't get all of those with Lightburn. And so for all of my testing, I used Make It, not Lightburn. I do have a Lightburn license, and it's what I normally use, but in order to get all the features, it's worth just going with Make It for now. And you can connect the Vision to your computer through either USB or Wi-Fi. When you first start, you have to use USB. Then once you've got it set up, you can switch to using Wi-Fi, and your PC will connect. Your PC will communicate with the WeCreat Vision over your Wi-Fi network. The basic workflow with Make It is pretty simple. You just open the software, select your machine, and then depending on what you're going to do, you either draw using the built-in tools, upload an image. There's a whole design library there of other designs you can drop in if you want to. So you put those all in, you decide if you want it to be a flat piece like this or use the rotary, because that will alter how the machine acts. If you do rotary, you have to plug in the diameter or the circumference of your cylinder, and the software needs that to calculate the height. And from there, the machine will do its autofocus, and that'll lower it to the proper height for your material and give you an image of the material so that you can do the placement like I described earlier with this. And then just click upload. The software will send the G-code file from your PC to the machine, and then this button right here will light up. You just push that and it'll start going. I think that's a little bit annoying. I wish you didn't have to push that software, or wish you didn't have to push that button. I wish you could just start it from the software. For me, it's not a big deal because my PC is right there. But for people that are going to put the machine in a different room from their computer, it seems like an unnecessary step to have to leave the computer, go over, push this button to get it started. It'd be nice to just be able to start that from your computer. Not a big deal, but you know, it's something. And it's also worth noting that the machine doesn't have any other controls on it. This button is the only control other than the power switch on the back. So you can't do things like position the laser head or anything like that. And you also can't do that in the software. At least not really. You can't manually control any of the movement. You just control where you're placing cuts. That's not a big deal because you shouldn't really normally need to do that. but it'd be nice if you could. The only thing you can really do in the software for manual control is lower the Z-axis all the way down for storage. Otherwise, it's just going to move where you place cuts. I did, however, find one issue with the software, which was pretty weird. It would scale things down by quite a bit. So I almost always work in millimeters in CAD and in whatever CAM, G-code, whatever software I'm using. I try to stick with millimeters. And so if, for instance, I drew a 100 millimeter by 100 millimeter square in CAD and imported it into the Make It software, it would bring that square in as 35.3 millimeters by 35.3 millimeters. And I'm not sure why exactly that is. Scaling issues aren't that uncommon, but you usually see it in specific ratios that correspond to unit mismatches. So you might import something and find that it's 10 times too small, in which case it was probably a centimeters to millimeters mismatch. Or maybe it's 25.4 times too small, in which case it's probably a inches to millimeters mismatch. In this case, it's about 1/3, and I can't think of any units that would cause that kind of mismatch. I asked the WeCreat team about it, and they weren't sure exactly what the problem was, but they said it'll be updated in future releases of the Make It software, so hopefully we'll have that fixed, but for the time being, you're just gonna have to manually scale your parts to match what they're supposed to be and not what Make It brings it in as at that 1/3 size. The Make It software also misses a few features that you might expect to see. For instance, if you're doing something like a picture, you can't control the way the angle that the laser scans. It's always going to scan the same direction, which is going back and forth like this along the x-axis. I'm not sure why they didn't include any option to change that. It's pretty common to do like a 45-degree angle or something like that, because you don't want those lines to match up with wood grain. You want it to go against wood grain. So it would be nice to have that feature. It's not a big deal, but it's something that you normally see in laser cutter software and not in the Make It software. Another issue is that there's not a whole lot you can do as far as the image processing. There are a few options where it will pre-process the image to make it more suitable for laser engraving, but you don't have a whole lot of control over the parameters of the cut itself. And then there are a couple small issues, like you can't center align text when you place it. So if you have multiple lines of text that you want to all be centered, you're going to have to do them as separate boxes of text and then align those all together. There is a tool to do that, but not as a single block of text. So it's little things like that that really should be there but are missing, and I'm not sure if they were just overlooked. They'll probably get added in future updates, but for now it's worth noting that you may be missing some features that you would expect. All of that said, from a performance standpoint, the machine is very good. The 20-watt diode laser is pretty powerful. You can cut through, like all of this was one pass. You can cut through black acrylic in one pass, and you could do it at a pretty good speed. I think they advertise the top speed is 600 millimeters a second. Whether you'll actually be able to use that is obviously dependent on your cut settings and the material and how deep you need to cut, that sort of thing. But compared to the old school diode lasers, which were all like would max out at like 5 watts, something like that, this is really good. It's worth also noting that diode laser power and CO2 laser power aren't a straight one-to-one match. So if you see like a 40-watt CO2 laser, like the popular Chinese K40 lasers, this isn't necessarily just exactly half that power. There's a lot of differences that come down to the wavelength, and diode lasers generally are a completely different wavelength than CO2 lasers, so that's worth keeping in mind. But compared to the competition of other diode lasers, this is right up there. Most of them are around that 20 watt mark right now for the good ones. I think there's some that are going up to 40, but 20 watt is solid, and this machine is able to handle that just fine and run quickly. But just to make sure your expectations are in the right place, keep in mind that this cannot cut metal. Can't cut any kind of metal. It can, however, engrave like stainless steel. Like this cup is stainless steel that was engraved. It can engrave stainless steel, not other types of metals. It can only engrave stainless steel. Again, it comes down to the wavelength and how different materials absorb versus reflect that laser beam. But it can engrave stainless steel. Other than stainless steel, it can also engrave stone. It can engrave ceramic, like this cup. It can engrave anodized or powder coated metals. So this is a stainless steel cup that was powder coated, so engraved down through the, really it's just cutting away the powder coating. And then it can cut through materials like wood, especially basswood works really well, but all sorts of wood, leather, paper, fabric, and acrylic. I'll come back to acrylic in just a minute. Here are some things it has cut. This is just a simple wood box, but I wanted to show this because it shows how quickly you can build things. If you're not familiar with laser cutting, this just has finger joints. And the cool thing about this is I just plugged this into a little online generator. I just said I wanted a box and gave it some basic dimensions. It spit out some image files. I gave that to the Make It software, cut it, and then had a assembled box in less than 10 minutes. So that's a really cool way to show how quickly these machines work. Like if you're used to 3D printing, printing a box is going to take several hours, but with a laser cutter you can have one in 10-15 minutes. And they can get a lot more complex than this. This is just a basic one to show the idea. These were test prints that they sent me just to show that everything works. This is, you can see where I cut the box out of this material, an image I engraved on there. Again, the stainless steel cups. This one engraved in stainless steel, this one through the powder coating. And even in ceramic. The contrast isn't great because the underlying material is white and the surface is white, but this is actually pretty deeply cut. It's basically all the way through the glaze and down into the ceramic beneath. So you can really feel it. The contrast isn't that high. So that'll depend sort of on the color and the type of ceramic that you're cutting into. Now, acrylic is especially interesting. If you are in the maker world, you probably have an interest in using your laser cutter for acrylic. Laser cutters traditionally work really well with acrylic. With a CO2 laser, you can easily cut through any kind of acrylic. But with this laser, it's a little bit trickier. So WeCreat advertises it as being able to cut through black acrylic. So I bought a whole sheet, or a whole bunch of different sheets of acrylic, because I wanted to see if you could do other colors as well. So this is black acrylic, and it cut through really easily. A single pass going pretty quick. Cut through black acrylic easily. The quality of the cut is really nice. But what about the other colors? So in my testing, I found that red, dark green, yellow, and orange all cut acceptably. I wouldn't say perfectly, but acceptably, but these all took 3 passes to do. So on the exact same settings that took a single pass with black acrylic, these each took 3 passes using those same settings. The cuts aren't quite as clean as they were for the black, but I consider them acceptable. You could use this for real projects and that sort of thing. So black works really well. Red, dark green, yellow, and orange, well enough. Then if we look at some other colors, the results weren't great. So if you can see, we have light blue, pink, light green, and dark blue and white. These, I would say none of them were cutting well enough to be acceptable. So you could cut through these. Again, this was 3 passes, and if you kept going, you could get through the material eventually, maybe 5, 6 passes, something like that. But the quality of the cut is just too messy, and I wouldn't consider that acceptable. Again, that all comes down to the wavelength of the laser and how the material reflects versus absorbs that laser. So in this case, instead of just cutting through cleanly and burning away material, it's really just kind of melting it around. And so you're getting these really wide cuts, and they're messy and just not good. You can make it work in a pinch if you had to, just don't expect really good results from that, from these colors. So overall, I think the WeCreat Vision is a pretty good machine. The price is decent. It's about $1,250 US for the basic machine. That does not include the rotary axis or the Fume extractor, which I have down here. It doesn't include those. And I think the Fume extractor is going to be a must-have for most people, especially if you're cutting indoors like I am here. That Fume extractor really helps to pull all the smoke and fumes through a filter so that your whole place doesn't smell and doesn't get full of smoke. Wood smoke isn't that bad, but if you're cutting something like acrylic, it gets really smelly. So the Fume extractor is a big help in that regard. If you do want the machine with the rotary axis and the Fume extractor, I think it's about $2,000 for all 3, and that's pretty competitive. It's definitely cheaper than nice machines from like X-Tool, which is kind of at the top of the prosumer kind of market. And this kind of cuts that in half. It's kind of between the upper end of the hobbyist market and the lower end of the prosumer market. I think it's a competitive price. It's not like an amazing deal. You're not going to pay like half as much for this as you would for a competing machine, but you'll save probably a little bit of money compared to some of the other brands you might be considering. And that's pretty good considering the size. This can cut 420 by 290 millimeters. That's the actual working area that you can fit a piece of material a little bit bigger than that. That's 16.54 by 11.42 inches and up to 140 millimeters tall, which is 5.51 inches. That's without the platform inside, so you'd have to remove that to get a piece of material that thick. With the material, I think it's about half that. The software isn't perfect. Like I said, there's some issues with Make It that can be a little bit frustrating, but they're probably not deal breakers for most people. But overall, it works well. The hardware is really good, surprisingly good. I think it's a nice looking machine. It feels well built. Nothing feels cheap or low quality. It's a solid machine that feels thought out. And I'm hoping that all those little problems with the software that I described, I'm hoping they'll get better soon. I really like the camera positioning system that lets you lay out your parts without overlapping and things like that. That's an awesome feature. I like the fume extraction since I'm cutting indoors and it helps keep smoke and smell down. And I like that it cuts fast and clean. So overall, I recommend the WeCreat Vision. I think if you're considering it, you'll probably be happy with it. There's a lot of laser cutters on the market in that kind of 20 watt diode range, but this is a good one. I like it. It's going to be my main laser cutter going forward. So that should give you an idea of how much I like it. Thanks for watching, and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel if you like seeing cool maker projects and reviews for devices and machines like this one. Thank you.